Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing in Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. Welcome back to the Classroom Narratives podcast, where today I'm joined by Bonnie Fox and InnaRae Guy. Bonnie Fox is an adjunct instructor of composition at Southern New Hampshire University and also supports the dean as the department's academic partner. She's been teaching writing since 2004, starting as a tutor for middle school and high school students, and then moving into college-level instruction. Bonnie lives with her family on a small farm in Florida, where she homeschools her children, gardens badly, and raises chicken, cows, and a very vocal pig. InnaRae Guy is an adjunct instructor of composition and facilitator for adjunct instructor training programs at Southern New Hampshire University. InnaRae has enjoyed teaching students in secondary and higher education for over 25 years. Additionally, as a singer, songwriter, and poet, her work empowers the human spirit, encouraging listeners to honor the inward journey home, discover our unique light within our ancestors and ourselves, and, when called upon, use it to transform our respective environment for the better. Both in the classroom and through writing essays, poetry, and songs, she makes use of her own challenges on the healing path to help others, living out the famous quote by Jerry Cantrell, quote, "Part of the healing process is sharing with other people who care," end quote. And personally, I wanted to invite both my colleagues, Bonnie Fox and InnaRae Guy, into the conversation with me because I, too, am an instructor through Southern New Hampshire University. And while today's conversation is completely unaffiliated with our school, it is so awesome to actually have three online instructors from throughout the country here together to join us on the Zoom. And I also did my master's through Southern New Hampshire University. And I can say that this is the first time that I've actually had instructors sitting in front of me in 2D and actually in real time to have a conversation. So Bonnie and InnaRae, welcome to the both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joey.
So glad to have you all both. And did you each want to say a little something as well, just so the audience can distinguish your voices?
This is Bonnie Fox.
This is InnaRae Guy.
Welcome again. So Bonnie and InnaRae, this is also my first panel conversation. So this is really exciting. Normally I do one-on-one, so to have a panel is really, really cool. I'm very excited for this as well. So to start our conversation, we are both online instructors in some capacity here. And I'm thinking about the different types of students that we meet in our online classes. So for example, at Southern New Hampshire, we typically have a pretty diverse population of English language learners. We have online students who are returning back to school. Some are even discharged military. Some are raising families. And we have a very, very vast and ever-growing community of students who are joining to be a part of our programs and classes. So I wanted to start by asking today, what kind of work have each of you done in your professional journeys to support diverse learners and trying to shape that trauma-informed teaching significantly for EFL students and returning to the classroom students?
Well, in my case, I kind of ended up in this space a little just by the way life sometimes presents you with unexpected journeys. We were living out of the country for a while, so I had limitations on the kind of work I was allowed to do, but I was able to do some extensive tutoring. And when I posted the job availability that I'm here to help people with writing, I received information from a lot of EFL learners that were in Canada at the time saying they just wanted to do better in their classes with their writing. But as I went through this, I was increasingly humbled by the stories that they were telling me about their experiences. I think there's a temptation when people come from other countries to English-speaking countries, there's a mindset that they should be always grateful for everything. But I think that it takes away from what is often a very disorienting experience for them, especially if they're coming from a language background where they may have known very little English. And now they're trying to, in the higher ed space, trying to finish a degree or complete a degree that in itself is difficult, and they may be bringing with them any number of challenges from their own background. I had one student who was from China, and she spoke about how it was very, very sad for her to have been at the top of her class. And now she could barely pass. And she knew it wasn't about her intelligence. She knew it wasn't about anything other than that she just was having a very difficult time navigating these complex ideas in a language that was really unfamiliar to her. So, I mean, that in itself is a kind of trauma that I don't think should just be dismissed because you should say, well, you should be grateful now for being here. She was grateful to be there, but it didn't take away from that personal challenge, which was impacting her ability to learn and her desire to continue. So my role, which was very small in its own way, was just when she would send me something, I would help understand what it was she was trying to convey so that it could be placed in the conventional style that would be appropriate for that particular assignment or that discipline, while still respecting her own words and ideas and what she was, really understanding what it was she was trying to say, because she had a knowledge of whatever these topics were that I didn't have. I just needed to help frame it such that she could submit it for the score she deserved to have based on her knowledge. I kind of ended up encountering students with these stories that had a lot of trauma because of, again, the very disorienting nature of coming to a new place where so much of your background is now taken away from you, not intentionally, but just because you've kind of had to leave it behind, but it's still part of who you are. And trying to strip that away from yourself is deeply traumatic. But, it's just being there, letting them tell me what they wanted to share and helping them so that they can empower themselves, continue moving forward, and feel better about themselves, because it really is, it makes a big difference.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Bonnie. To piggyback off of what you were just talking about, it brought to mind my first experience teaching high school, which is how I ended up in the situation where trauma-informed practices had to be developed on my part. I had always had a desire to do trauma-informed, having come out of the inner city and realizing that there was some suffering that I can give back, but I did not end up in an inner city school. When I first got hired, I ended up in an affluent, predominantly white district where I'm thinking, oh, I probably don't run into any trauma because there's a thought in the conversation of trauma informed diversity that somehow white people who are affluent aren't experiencing any trauma. And that's just not true. But in any case, when I started working, my second nature was to depend on my own trauma and reflect back and say, okay, what did I need as a kid? And then I would try to implement some of that. To Bonnie's point, I did teach writing lab. They put me in a writing lab course twice a day. It was part of my schedule. And they put all of the students from Taiwan, China, they could not speak English, Mexico, wherever they came in, they were in the writing lab. And I love, Bonnie, that you talk about how just learning about their life experiences helps. I was actually pretty interested because sometimes they told traumatic stories of why they had to come to America in the first place. And other times they would share happy stories about how their families were and how school was over there. I learned that we were way more lenient and understanding as teachers in America than some of the teachers they had over there. But I started to address their need to feel like they were succeeding because there was apparently some shame that came with the fact that they had to go to writing lab in the first place. And that added to some of the trauma they were having in the academic space. So a lot of the assignments I was allowed to do with them was to have them write the stories that they were telling me. So, tell me about your classroom. Okay, well, your paragraph today is going to be about what happened when you were in first grade. And I decided to differentiate, and I realized differentiation is key to helping address classrooms from a trauma-informed perspective. At first, I was implementing what one would call the golden rule, like referencing my own trauma and thinking, I'm going to treat others as they would treat me. There's this new word going around, if you heard about it, a new phrase which they're calling the platinum. So I've recently started to really reference the platinum rule in my mind beforehand, because applying the platinum rule is takes it one step further from treating others the way you want to be treated and basically treating others the way they want to be treated. And of course, as a instructor of children, secondary ed, and college aged adults alike, the only way to treat someone the way they want to be treated is to learn from them first.
Thank you for sharing all those points. And I'm thinking about here from Bonnie's conversation as to how we do, yes, tend to see this idea of gaslighting secondary English language learners in some respects. We make them think that they should be grateful to be in a program where they really are not equipped up front with the tools to help them fully succeed. And then we make it become their problem when they're not up to the same speed as their classmates. And then it begins to have them carry this baggage along with it, a lot of baggage that goes with that type of trauma as well. And there's a lot of literature that exists. Some of my favorites include, if anyone has ever read Push by Sapphire, there's also a lot of international stories as well that just talk about the presence of the teacher that implements learning as either a tool of pain or learning that can be a tool for healing. And that's a bit of a, not to sound cliche, but a double-edged sword that we deal with in education as writing professors, that we do have those two ends of how we instruct that could be either trauma triggering or trauma informing. And sometimes we do it without being deliberate about it. And so with InnaRae as well, I'm so glad you mentioned the platinum phrase, which is treat others how they want to be treated, because we're going to be listening to the segment in March. But in April, I just recorded a segment with Rob Durant, who is a marketing and sales professional, and we'll talk about how that rule applies to students and educators as well within academic settings. So I'm encouraging our audience to stick around for that conversation as well to see how that phrase helps us as educators. So my first classroom as well was also in a white and affluent district. And I was teaching eighth grade Cambridge, eighth grade gifted. And one thing that also surprised me, because just like InnaRae, I too had the mentality that the group that I was with would probably be quote unquote better off than other areas that may have had less goods and services provided to them. But I realized that what this group is dealing with, when I did visibly ask them to share their trauma in a way that looking back could have been trauma triggering rather than trauma informing, they had a whole different avenue of experiences that they are navigating, especially when it came to quote unquote the competition that they were working through in order to make sure that they met their graduation needs. And the mental health crisis, the burnout rate amongst these 14-year-olds was so painful to witness that I felt like I had to say something to my leadership. And unfortunately, my suspicions were proven when leadership's answer was, don't worry about it. It's all about the numbers. The trauma that these students were feeling, because they recognized they were being reduced to numbers, I thought was a whole different kind of avenue that other districts and areas are less focused in, because they just want to see those students survive to the end of that school day.
Yeah, if you don't mind me popping in on
Yeah.
that, it's very triggering what you just said for me. And I don't know if I shared this with Bonnie. We had a few conversations. Thank you, Bonnie. I'm so glad you're here. I lost a student. I just, you don't forget the students you lose. And she had everything, the big house, the money, and, there is this assumption that they're not suffering. And what she was suffering with was depression. And I did everything I could, even down to homeschooling. When they pulled her out, they asked me to come in and try and help her through her assignments, and we would talk. And in 3 years, we lost her. There was just nothing I can do. And so the suicide rate, which nobody likes to talk about, is high. It's one thing to, it's all over the news about, shootings or what have you in certain areas and people, stealing or, oh my God. But what's happening is just that if a student cannot decide that there's another way because they're so inundated with this is the path you're supposed to take, that is just as violent and just as traumatic. So I just wanted to share that personally, I do have a student that I lost in that area, and it really taught me a whole lot about just assuming that everybody's fine because their material needs are met. So thank you for saying that.
Absolutely. Thank you, InnaRae. And I resonate because I lost a very close friend to suicide months before when I say months, I mean like 90 days before my first time ever being a classroom teacher. And plaguing myself into, I guess, the gaslighting, like, how could I have not been the one to see the signs, really led me to want to be that trauma-informed teacher that first year. And when students would come to me and excavate their deepest emotional circumstances, knowing that I was a mandatory reporter, when they would come to me and say, "We know that you'll listen even when the social worker will not," it brings me or any educator into that position where Pandora's box is open. And at that point, you don't know how to put it away, even when leadership threatens you practically for trying to get that content from the students in a way that you hope will help them as a mandatory reporter. Yet, nevertheless, they're stalemated. And the students knowing that their pleas for help will fall on the deaf ears because even though, like we said, their physical needs are met, but their emotional circumstances are drowning. That alone only continues to trigger and escalate what they're going through. How can we help students when they reach that type of circumstance and crisis?
This is so challenging because, of course, we have to see this from the lens of being educators, but obviously, and I know we've talked about this, I am not a professional therapist. I don't have the credentials to provide therapy. So it's a very fine line. But on the other hand, if someone comes to you with just heartbreaking depression or whatever it happens to be, particularly these young people, and what InnaRae said, it is just as violent. It's psychological violence to place these sort of expectations on young people. They don't know how to handle. They just need someone to listen. I know that sometimes over the years, I've had students tell me things. Sometimes it's overwhelming because you think, this is a lot for me to take on. But on the other hand, they're coming to the person they know will listen. And if I'm not going to be the person that listens, there may not be anyone. And I go through life feeling like you never know when you're going to be in a position to be a second chance or someone's last chance. And it's not to put credit on me. It's to say, you don't know. You may be in that moment for a reason, and it may literally save this person. So just putting aside whatever I may be going through, the compassion fatigue, we've been through that before. But on the other hand, what's the worst thing? I have to be compassionate for another few minutes, but it may change this person's life. It may save this person's life. I don't come from a particularly affluent background, but I did attend for elementary and first couple of years of middle school. I attended a small private school, and I probably took it more seriously than I should have. I was a very serious kid. I wanted to get perfect grades. And a while back, my parents visited and they brought all my old report cards, and they were so proud to show me all these old report cards. And I started reading through them. And I had to walk away and cry and remember, like, every single report card said the same thing. She's so well behaved. She's so accommodating. She does everything she's told. She doesn't miss anything. And I was like, I remember being so stressed out as a child. On the surface, I was the kid that was the great kid. But I remember my parents got to the point where they couldn't afford the school anymore and took us out and started homeschooling us. And over that summer, my hair grew like 6 inches. Just walking away from this stressful environment probably saved me in its own way. And it wasn't even like intentional, but I remember that on the surface, everything was great for me. But I look back and I know I was really stressed out, unhappy child. So these kids where everything looks fine or seems like it should be fine, or someone tells you, I grew up in the suck it up generation where we were told, just get over it. And I have to tell you, I'm pretty sure in the entire history of humanity, telling someone to suck it up has never yielded the desired outcome. It doesn't work. It just causes repression and frustration. And I have found that there is something kind of therapeutic for me too. When people come to me and I don't feel like I have to tell them that, I tell them, it's okay. It's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay to talk to me. I can listen. That kind of releases something inside me too. Like, we don't have to perpetuate this very toxic mindset of telling people everything should be fine. There's no meter for trauma.
Wow.
Everyone's trauma matters. If it impacted them, it matters. And if we create like a system of, well, your trauma isn't as important because someone else has a worse situation than you do. We have not helped anyone. So yes, a student may come to me and I might think, well, I've heard much worse stories than that, but I don't have the right to tell them it doesn't matter. If it matters to them, it matters. And if they need to come and tell me, then I can be honored that they trust me with that information and that they believe I will care enough to take some kind of action or provide some kind of opportunity that will help them. I don't want to be the person that rejects them because, again, I don't know if that was their last chance.
I'm also thinking about when we speak about that element of being trauma-informed in the classroom. So my question is, when we're working with the online space, how can we continue to help students find their voices through writing and continue to be that element of empowerment in the online space?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Bonnie, thanks so much for sharing that. As much as we talk, I didn't even know that part of your story. So it's great, like constantly learning about other people and what they've been through in life. And I just totally love what you're talking about. This I grew up also in the suck it up and get over it. And basically we were emotionally neglected. I think this is an ongoing joke with Gen X and early millennials. Like we were just kind of like finding our way by ourselves. I think somewhere in how maybe we're raising our children now, the later millennials, Gen Zers, we're giving them that space. And so they're learning their language at a younger age. They're speaking up at a younger age. I could see it, as they come into the classroom. And Joey, to the question about the online, I feel like Bonnie did answer it and just be kind because we have so many opportunities to give them feedback through our own writing. So in the discussion boards, when they first start out that first week, they're already writing. They're already sharing through writing. And of course, we're composition instructors, right? So we know what's happening. And we get a chance to respond in the discussion board. Be kind in the discussion board. If you have to email someone back, be kind when you email them back. If they got an assignment in late and you have to give feedback about that, given the platinum rule, which tells us to treat people the way they want to be treated, you don't know why the assignment is late. So ask a question first. Then when you learn about them, you could say, okay, if I had two sick children with RSV and one was in the hospital for the last week, how then would I want someone to write me back? So I believe those are the many, many opportunities that we have to just deal with the trauma in a safe way because we are not therapists and we don't want to dig in too deep and wind up giving someone advice that can worsen their dilemma. I think in most cases, that's enough to get them over the hump. And if they have to find, outside help for their situation, what have you, it helps them go forward and get what they need without feeling like they have to involve the professor in a way that's out of our scope of understanding or professional expertise.
InnaRae and Bonnie, when you had your conversation a little earlier last year through this new podcast, you were talking about this idea of the students connecting with their teachers, with us playing the role of the local parentis. And I'll give a little quick story as well. So when I was in high school, I was from the generation of helicopter parents, where I would come home and until I reached algebra, where she no longer could because she's a journalism major for crying out loud, my mom would sit at the table and try and do our math homework with us. And then my dad would step in and do the science homework with us because he used to work in like pharmacy and big pharma, and he knew that side of the conversation. And I would typically be on my own with English and history because I could actually do it by myself and I was good at it. So when I went to my first interview at my alma mater city, Parkland, when I went back to interview with the Parkland schools, the first question they asked is, okay, let's talk about parents. We have what we call here the PEP, the Parkland parents. Are you familiar with how they work? And I said, I was raised by two of them. Next. So this generation of helicopter parents was what I came from. And I remember I was with my mentor. His name was Dr. Mendelson. I hope that we can get him on the show at some point as well. Dr. Mendelson sat with me when we were getting our course cards for our junior year. He was my freshman history teacher. Here I am, end of sophomore year. He's known me since first period, first day of freshman year. And I went to him to ask what courses I should take for my junior year. And I said to him, Dr. Mendelson, I want to take AP this and AP that and AP the other thing. And he looks at me with my little notebook on my table, like my little agenda. And he had me do something that actually made me feel very emotionally upset. Like I think I started crying when he told me to do this. He said, I want you to take your agenda and I want you to throw it into my trash can. How do you tell someone with OCD to throw their agenda in the trash can? So he's laughing like, no, you don't do that. But when I did that, my twin brother was in the room with me as well. I'm also a twin. He said to me, forget about what's on your agenda because all your agenda says is test here, quiz there, paper there, project here. He says, when's the last time you've actually done something with your twin? When's the last time you two have actually gone to dinner together or even taken a walk together? And my twin and I looked at each other and we're like, probably never. Probably never. And he says, instead of
Wow.
picking out your courses, he says, you want to take AP Link? Great. Go do it and good luck. But he says, until you sign up for AP this and AP that, you're 16 years old. When you turn 18, your dynamics are not going to be the same. He says, take your agenda back, and I need you to schedule in time to be that twin brother, be that son, be that friend, because I can see by the schedule you have and the schedule you want that you do not provide yourself time to do any of that. And that was a trauma in itself, to come to
Wow.
that realization. What made it even more traumatic is that I didn't listen to him. And then when I got to my senior year, I was, again, whole nother podcast to talk about this, but I was so emotionally drained. It made me realize that I should be that person to help students, but why am I that person to help students? When my own students come to me and say, oh, Mr. Weisler, I have this and that and the other things, like I look at them and I see them, I acknowledge them, but I also think about why me? Like, why am I the one that they're coming to talk about those conversations? So I wanted to hear a little bit more about our take on the role of local parentis as teachers. Why us? How many of us have ever had those imposter moments as the teacher? I certainly, every day I walk into a classroom, I think, why me? Like, how am I the one up here in this classroom talking about composition right now at this time in the space? Like, why me? And how do we deal with that imposter syndrome, especially in the face of being told about other students' traumas?
I remember it was my first teaching job in college. It was at a community college in Michigan. And this was right after the economic situation changed in the Detroit area. So a lot of people that had had these great jobs did not have these jobs anymore. And a lot of them were going back to school. So there I was in my 20s, with my cozy life and my master's degree. And there are these people, some of them twice my age, who are having to come back to school. And it was really, really humbling because I felt kind of ridiculous at times. Like they knew more than I could possibly have known. It was in a very different context, but what did I know? I knew a lot of academic stuff. I knew how to teach writing and literature, and I knew about all of that. So I realized I wasn't going to sell very well as the serious professor. So pretty much from that point, and even when I taught because there were multiple branches of this college, even when I taught in the branch that was more traditional young people just taking community college classes right out of high school, I decided that the best approach for me was to be not like professor, but just think of myself as a facilitator. I happen to have a knowledge base that you need in order to continue your education so you can accomplish your goals. This is not the only class you're taking. I don't have to treat it like the most important thing you'll ever do. I just need to provide you with these skills and help you along the way because there is a much bigger picture of what they're trying to do. So placing myself in that space of being more of a facilitator of learning and just transferring the knowledge that I have to them, I think that's been a more successful approach. I think it means that the students are more likely to feel like they can come to me if it's not like a business thing, but if they have something come up and they can't get something in on time, they know that I'm not going to wrap their knuckles because I haven't behaved that way in the classroom. They can talk to me like an adult and I can talk to them like an adult and I can say, sure, if you need an extra day, that's fine. I have no problem with that. Thank you for telling me. I also understand that sometimes for a lot of them, it was hard for them to come to me because I was a lot younger. And that was a very strange dynamic. So I also respected if they were just prepared to take the hit on their grade because they were not comfortable. But I wanted to be available to the ones that did want to talk to me. In the online space, it is a little bit different because we're always having to kind of project ourselves in a friendly way that they can't see you standing there smiling at them with a happy tone. So I do think I come across as a lot perkier and bubblier than I actually am as a human being. There's a lot of exclamation points in my writing, especially in that first
Yes,
week.
same.
But I feel like if they think or if they know that I really am friendly, like how do I give out the bat signal that I'm friendly and I'm helpful and I'm encouraging and I want you to talk to me? I think you have to do it with the you overshoot the tone a little. And you also listen to them. You know, students like InnaRae has said that first week discussion is critical because they tell you or don't tell you so much about themselves, sometimes by not saying things. The ones that don't tell you really anything about their backgrounds, the ones that maybe don't share a degree, sometimes they just forgot or they were busy and they just wrote it up really fast, but sometimes they're just not comfortable sharing. I pay attention to that because I think it matters. This is a very different space to have to share about yourself. And not everyone has figured out what their comfort level is in what is sometimes their very first college class. So I always try to draw something out that they say, something interesting that they mentioned. If it's possible, compliment the way they describe something. If they tell me where they're from, I often look it up, not to be weird or, you know, like I'm going to find out where you live. No, I look it up because it might be like, oh, it looks beautiful, like some really cool outdoor activities. I'll bet it's great that something, if they volunteered information, I try to find something that will engage and let them know I'm paying attention and I care and that they can talk to me and that I'm there to facilitate, not be scary professor.
And funny enough, like when I took my master's, if a professor would introduce themselves with period, not to sound petty, but I think it's validating with how our students think. If a professor introduced themselves or responded to me in my intro with periods, that would indicate to me how much or how little I should share. If they responded with explanation points, then I would know I would be a lot more comfortable in communicating with that professor.
Yes, I love that. So extra efforts like Bonnie discussed, overkill with the kindness, the exclamation points, the emojis to give them a sense that it's a safe space to share and express their feelings. And from there, I think we're both then in a position to grow together throughout the term.
Yeah, I think that one thing that we should do as educators is to just pick and choose our battles and avoid the ones that hinder a student who is at least trying to be successful. And when we speak about the superhero narrative, well, so I just defended my dissertation in December that talks a lot about that. And that phrase, superhero, 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 is actually peppered pretty frequently throughout the 300-page project. And I just heard
Mhm.
from my advisor last week, because we're going to publish this by May, this entire dissertation. He says, I have one mega suggestion that I really would like to see. He says, the superhero narrative from the educator standpoint sounds like a suicide mission. And I want that to be eliminated and switched out to say caregiver, because that's a much more tangible approach as to what the educator is. They're caregivers. And I'm really excited for this because I just reached out to a lot of my former middle school students who are all in college now, even some of my current college students who are, when I taught them for freshmen now, they're seniors and even graduated. I reached out to about 10 of them this past week. And we're going to try and arrange a panel in May for the podcast, the last one in the spring
Wow.
2025 season. And I'm going to ask them this question that we're talking about now is, when did education set you up to believe in the superhero narrative? And as your teacher, how did I prove it or detangle it? Because I can tell you, for those students that had me in my first year after the shooting, I was not a superhero. Like, I was just trying to get
Mm.
myself through the day. Even though I was there, I acknowledged them. They apparently saw me as a savior because I told them I am here to help you through your crises, and they believed me. And they would come to me and give me all of their personal emotional trauma that, again, only fed into my imposter syndrome. I sit here and I think, because as a student, when I was, in early 2000s, when I was in the classroom as a student, there was something that happened pretty standard across the whole board for 13 years, that did make me believe that my teachers were always okay, always had it together, and were superheroes. And my favorite teacher, my 8th grade Spanish teacher, my twin brother and I had it together. We sat right next to each other for the whole year. The best of the best. Love her so much. And when I worked alongside her, my very first ever classroom was right next door to hers. And when I heard her teach throughout the day, like she would see me with my eyes so red, like I was about to burst out crying every day after my first period. She'd just say, relax, relax, relax. And I finally asked her, I said, Professor, how did you do it? Because you come in, you're like explanation point, explanation point, explanation point, and you're always so much fun. And here we are 15 years later, and I remember like every day of your class. How do you do it? And she looked at me and she said, honestly, I don't. It's how it is. It's how you see it. It's not how I see it, but it's how you see it. And you'll find the people that will celebrate you on campus. She says, find the people that will celebrate you, because the ones who won't will still be here in some capacity. And I'm sitting here wondering, because again, I think I had 28 teachers a year for high school, plus 18, 40. Let's say we had about 47 teachers approximately between K through 12. About 47 teachers always made things look like they were A-okay, well-aligned, and perfect. And I did not feel like I was that way at all as an educator. Not at all. But my students thought I was still that way. How and when do you think we set up that superhero narrative at the student level to the point that we're held to those high expectations that lead us to become that local parentis figure?
I honestly think it's set up. Society is constantly coming up with the one person that's the best golf player, and then luring people into trying to be the next Tiger Woods. It draws us away from community and draws us into a way of being that's quite lonely, I think, trying to be number one with everything.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like as like when students see us as that superhero, I guess we're just socially constructed as the educator to be that thought leader and figure of saving. And I'm curious, like, how can we change that for our students, or is it even necessary? Like, I think it would benefit us to switch that narrative, but I just wonder if there's a way to actually make that happen.
I would agree with what InnaRae said about that need to like point to the one. There's a tendency just within human nature to create our own idols. We admire success, but it's also extremely unsustainable and really, really exhausting to try to be that. I don't think we change this in one class, but we can start the pattern by not being that teacher. Just sometimes it's just being honest. I'm doing the Right Challenge this term, which is a collaborative experience for students in the liberal arts. And I was going through their drafts this week, and I had to post something and say, I'm going to make every effort to have everything done by this day of the week, but I got to be honest with you. We've got illness in the house. It just may not happen. I'm trying.
Oh,
It's hard, and a lot of our professors are working multiple jobs, and it's hard, and they're tired, and their students are tired. And just reminding everyone we can be human beings. Again, I go
and be
back to
kind.
yes, I know, I'm serious. I feel like this is my whole mantra. I'm not ever going to get a PhD with this as my mantra, but seriously,
We
be
should make,
kind is such in the education space. It really is kind of a big piece of it. Like, you can't go into education if you don't care about people, because education is about people. And if you care about people, you
exactly.
have to care about the fact that people have lives and challenges and personalities and very, very human realities that they're facing every day.
Yeah. I think that's a way, Joey, we're talking about trying to break down that superhero. If we can get more professors just saying it's okay to be vulnerable.
We may be superheroes in our content areas, but we're only caregivers in our human area. And so as we start to come to a close to our conversation today, I'm thinking about our conversation as a whole. And I wanted to see if we can get takeaways from InnaRae and Bonnie as well, in terms of some best practices for welcoming voices into a classroom and maximizing our learning outcomes while allowing both our students and course facilitators to have their voices heard.
One of the things I find interesting about teaching first year composition is that, unlike if I were in an upper level English course. Most of my students are not English majors. Most of them are going into different programs, I should say, so they have different interests. So when they bring me their writing, I can't expect it all to sound the same, because my students that are going into computer science are not, I shouldn't be giving them feedback. Oh, this could be more flowery. That is completely irrelevant to them and their
Right.
future. And so for me, just as a composition instructor, paying attention to these different types of voices in writing, not just on the personal level in the discussion forum, but also the fact that I am preparing them for the type of writing they will be doing. I don't have to know all about it, but not everyone has to write the same. I shouldn't grade based on a style that might be how I would write. And you get the students that come in and you think, this is how I would write the paper. A+, 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 it's beautiful. But then you get the ones that are perfectly good papers. It's a different style and a different voice. But the people that come into my class and think they can't write are the ones that were never encouraged because they had an English teacher who told them there's only one type of writing and one style.
Exactly.
And that's unrealistic and that's unfair. Because again, you're going to do writing in all these other fields, but it's not all going to sound the same. And that's been really humbling for me in the academic partner role, because I meet monthly with colleagues in different departments. And I love asking these questions. I will sometimes just, when I can, insert myself and say, tell me a little bit about writing in psychology. How's it different? Because when my students say I'm in the psych program, I think, well, I can't expect them to sound like an English major. I don't want them to sound that way. I want to hear their voice. And again, it's very much in a formative stage because they're not experts yet. But when they write a certain way that maybe doesn't sound like your standard English teacher essay kind of thing, it's still good. It can still be just fine. There's a difference between writing that maybe could stand to be improved and writing that's just a different sound. And I really, really try. I'm not great at this. I'm always working on it, but I really do try to listen for those different styles and voices.
Exactly. No, I had to intervene for a second because that's where my imposter syndrome also really comes in. And I tell this to my composition students all the time when I'm teaching it, especially in person. Whenever we start the argumentation unit, I say, hey, I want you all to know that I have no idea if I'm teaching you correctly. And my imposter syndrome is going to be really bad for the next 2 weeks, most in part because we want there to be a standard way to write, but because there's so many vast disciplines that can't be done, there can be a standard rubric to evaluate that, but I do not believe in standard papers. I actually had a student write to me yesterday and he said, is my paper on the right track? Is it good? Can I see an example paper? And I'm like, I can't really answer that. I can give you feedback with what you have, but quite frankly, I don't want your paper to sound like the example. I want you to just take your ideas and make it something that you can grow with. The way I see my classes is that if I feel like I'm benefiting from what the students are writing, then we've missed all the outcomes. If they think that they're benefiting from what they're writing, then we've met the objectives. And that's why I love having a vast array of what students are producing, because I want them to feel like that they can write something and remember it when they leave the course. That's how we meet our objectives.
Yeah, and there's that subtle nod to the platinum rule, right?
Yes.
I wanted to close out with 2 points. I feel like in our composition classes, it's naturally built in. Like I keep saying that, but it totally is in composition classes. The what is often hard for students to say, even in their own lives before they approach a composition course, they start to learn in our courses that it's easier and more ready for them to put on paper. I think we naturally are going to end up in this emotional healing space territory. It's just a natural thing. It's like, oh, I'm writing. So all of a sudden it just starts coming out. I don't know if you all had that experience when you first started writing, but I did. Oh my gosh, look how this flows. And wow, let me start talking about how my mom got on my nerves this morning. And we're all in academia, so I have to throw out there that there was a study. We know it because we experience it, but there's always have to be a study, right, to back up
Yeah,
what we're saying. So
exactly.
there was a study done, and it basically discovered that writing through whatever they're experiencing, even if it's to meet the academic objective, increased resilience in students. It decreased depressive symptoms in students. It decreased perceived stress, right? Because that's talking about the superhero stuff. A lot of that's perception. And it helps us as professors discover that there might be trauma. And so I think we're in a really good space there. And as far as like continuing to build the culture, we can continue to allow the space for some of that emotional writing and see ourselves as a part of a culture of people. Even though I'm the facilitator and they're the students, together we are in a culture where we're trying to grow together and work within a growth mindset and admit that we're both growing and learning together all the time, like from the beginning of the term to the end.
And I'll just piggyback off what you said about the community of the classroom, because I think this is another important thing we can model for students. Learning is not a fixed state. Education is not fixed. As the facilitator, as the instructor in the class, I'm always learning too. So when they say, well, I didn't know that, well, there are things I encounter every day I didn't know. And I recognize that it's an opportunity. You know, it's that kind of silly, potentially apocryphal story about Alexander the Great, who cried when he found out he'd conquered the whole world, you know, the known world at the time, in quotes. But I'm like, that's not a place we want to get to mentally, where it's like, oh, I know everything there is to know. That would be an opportunity to weep and grieve, because the idea that we as instructors are also always learning, because there's something to learn, and that students can teach us things. I love teaching the course I teach because every term I learn something new. The students will put a spin on one of the topics and I'll think, I had no idea. And I'm like really invested now in this argument. And I'll find myself Googling and like studying. And you find out that my own set of priorities is not the same as everyone else's. But I can, when I learn about other priorities that are out there, I can respect someone's perspective when they prioritize something else, because it is important. It just wasn't, I didn't know it was important because it's not my story. But when they tell their stories and I learn about their priorities, you just gain a lot more grace for the whole world, because you realize if you have a really narrow lens, you're never going to learn and you're never going to care. And I don't want to be that. I don't think you can work in education if you don't want to learn and you don't want to care. It doesn't work. You become the embittered professor that everyone can't stand. And I really, really don't ever want to be that person.
My friend and I have a pact with each other. I have a small group of cohort members. We've all said the day we find ourselves jaded, just tap the other one and we'll know to just get out and find something else to do with our lives. Just we will not let ourselves get to that point. We keep a lot of good eyes on each other. I agree. Like my mentor said to me from high school, she said, the day you stop learning is the day you stop growing. And like, if you're getting an observation, you never want to be a 10 out of 10 on the first try, because then you have no room to continue helping yourself grow. And I too, whenever I teach my classes, I always learn something new from my students' perspectives. And sometimes if I get a paper that's on a topic I would have never thought about, and the mechanics are fair, the formatting is, it's okay. But if the passion is there, automatically they're going to get a significantly higher grade, because I want to motivate them to keep talking about that aspect. And I think the more they just have that cheering on that they can do that, the more they'll feel that their voice matters. And again, when we talk about things that I want from the class, the formatting, MLA, right, versus what they need from the class, which is to find their voice. If they find their voice, now they've met the outcomes. And I'm so happy with that. And as we come to the conclusion of our conversation, I wanted to go ahead and thank our English Extraordinaire panelists, InnaRae Guy and Bonnie Fox, for their insights that remind us on the transformative power of voice, empathy, and trauma-informed practices that exist in education. If you found value in today's conversation, please share this episode and leave a review so we can continue establishing spaces where people can be seen, heard, and supported. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing in Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.